You may have seen this style of acoustical wood slat paneling somewhere on YouTube, or Lord knows, Instagram ads. I have always been enamored with the look, but also the promise of the acoustical sound properties. I knew the acoustical benefits couldn't be coming from the wood since hard surfaces generally reflect sound, so that must mean that they are coming from the backer material. Thus began my quest to find and source this material so that I could make my own. My first task to tackle was sourcing a supply of the felt material to act as the backer to the wood slats. I didn't just want to use paint to create contrast, as there are some great benefits to the acoustical felt, and the look is just, magnifique. I finally found a source online that sold the felt for a reasonable price and would ship for free, so I ordered it and waited for it to arrive a few days later. In the meantime, I had to figure out how I was going to attach these wood slats to the felt. It turns out that this felt is made from recycled PET plastic, which is the same plastic they use to make plastic water bottles. PET plastic is notoriously hard to adhere to anything, even itself, due to its low surface energy. Low surface energy just means the molecules in the material have very little attraction to each other, and it is hard to have adhesion without attraction. Materials with a surface energy below 36 dynes per centimeter, I know, are considered low surface energy and are very difficult to bond. These include non-stick surfaces such as polytetrafluoroethylene, or PTFE. If you want to know what the heck that is, it's the same stuff that your non-stick cookware is coated in. The commercial manufacturers tell you to use construction or grab adhesives if you want to adhere these panels to the wall when installing. I searched far and wide for a construction adhesive that listed PET plastic as an adherable material, and I thought I had found one from Gorilla Glue, their max strength construction adhesive, which listed felt, foam, and plastics. It turns out, after further research, that there is a tiny disclaimer on their website specifically omitting PET plastic. Strike number one. I looked at pretty much every construction adhesive on the market, and not a single one definitively listed this type of plastic. Strike number two. I found some industrial adhesives that are specifically meant to fuse PET to PET, but may not bond to wood. They're also toxic if improperly used. Strike number three. Finally, I found some articles online saying that silicone caulk would work. I was skeptical. Hot glue also would work, but it is not even close to a secure connection. So I decided to just reach out to several manufacturers, and they responded saying that they used staples instead of adhesives. This makes a lot of sense, given gluing these materials together is impossible or at best impractical. To keep costs down, I ordered some samples from a supplier to examine their construction methods for myself. Once the samples arrived, I flipped them over and, surprise, surprise, staples. With this episode behind me, I could move on with staples as my strategy. Whenever I do a project like this and utilize 1x2s from the hardware store, I always make sure to buy about twice as many as I need. I know that that may seem excessive, but after sorting through them, you'll end up with about 1/3 of them being too crooked to use properly, some questionable ones, and with half remaining that is straight and usable from the batch. I cut each slat individually using a stop block on the miter saw. I chose not to batch cut these mostly due to consistency, but also because I felt this was the safest and cleanest option because I'm about to stain these and I didn't want all the sawdust in my shop. I sanded the slats on 3 surfaces, the top and 2 sides. No issues leaving the backside unsanded here since it will be against the felt. After a good vacuuming, I prepped my workbench for staining and stained each slat using a dark walnut stain, wiped the excess, and left it dry until the next evening. Using those junk 1x2s, I made a lattice frame over my workbench which would more adequately support the length of the slats, given they're longer than my workbench, and gave me plenty of room to finish and shuffle the pieces in batches as I went along. Since the felt I purchased came pre-cut in 12-inch wide sections, I taped 2 panels together on the backside using gaffer tape. This is really just a temporary hold until I can adhere the slats to the felt using staples, and then use screws to adhere them to the wall. Since I like to consider myself a smart cookie, I took the time to model the panels and slats in SketchUp and came prepared with my layout. I found that spacing these slats consistently is really challenging without help, so I generally utilize offcuts from the slats and flip those on edge in between each slat. My SketchUp design actually had me using 1 less slat and having some excess felt, but when I spaced everything out on the felt using the spacers, everything lined up perfectly edge to edge with an even number of slats across the felt. Since I definitely planned that, it is not a welcome surprise either. Now that I had my layout confirmed, I had to flip everything and staple through the back of the felt into the wood. To be sure everything stayed in place, I had to come up with a solution to hold everything in place. This was actually quite challenging, given it had to be done upside down and with the slats in direct contact with the felt. I ended up creating a makeshift form for the panels that was the same width as the felt side by side, and attached end pieces to ensure I would be lined up. I taped off the entire bottom of the form with blue tape, as I hadn't come this far to scratch or damage any of these slats. Then I laid the slats face down and off camera cut slim spacers to go between each row of slats. Once I had everything spaced out, I laid the felt on top and began stapling. I made myself a marking tool which lined up with the center of each row of slats and used that as a template for the staple gun as I went down the felt. I added staples every 6 inches along the length. The funny thing is, I didn't really know this was going to work, I just had a really good hunch. Suffice to say, I was quite relieved when I took the new panel out of the form and flipped it. I found that I not only hadn't missed any staples, but I had also managed to pull off exactly what I was hoping for. I love when a good plan works out. I repeated the same process and soon both panels were ready for their install. I referenced instructions from some of the commercially available products which list 3 different ways to install the panels. The first way is to use construction adhesive, which we now know isn't the best idea. The second is to screw through the felt directly into the wall. And the last is to attach 2-inch wood battens first, then attach the panels to those. The last method creates an airspace which can also be stuffed with rock wool to further increase the acoustical properties. But an airspace acts as an isolation layer anyways. My original plan was to use the remaining 1x2s as the battens to hang these panels on the wall. The instructions tell you to use 2-inch thick battens, which is really only critical if you intend to stuff insulation back there, which I am not at this time. I also thought that having the panels stick off the wall so far would be awkward to look at, but in the end, I found that if the panels were too tight to the wall, they made the headboard pop out, and too far off the wall, and they made the headboard seem recessed. Ultimately, I decided on using 2x4s as my battens. I spaced my battens out approximately every 24 inches up the wall and screwed through into the studs that I could find. It was easiest to find and mark the studs first, then I used a laser to keep track of the stud locations as I went from batten to batten. I did have to use some drywall anchors and alternative screws as needed when I couldn't hit 2 studs. I stood both panels up to check their fit, and once I was happy with that, it was time to secure them to the battens and take a look at what we accomplished. I think what makes me happiest about this design is just how easily it can be translated into so many different spaces. The felt comes in black, and also a gray color, which matches a lot of lighter decors, and you can always use hardwoods or different stains to get your desired color. This build was just a part of my floating nightstand build, so go check the rest of that out here. Right there. Come on. Come on.